All right, welcome back, AP Econ students. Time for more free response questions from old AP exams. Today we are looking at the year 2018 and see if we can figure out what they want us to do here. So let's read it and see. In the early 20th century, limited transportation options and the lack of effective substitutes gave single cinema monopoly power in a small town. There's the clue. It's going to be a market type, no surprise there, and it's going to be a monopoly. Assume that Single Cinema is a profit-maximizing firm and currently operates at a negative economic profit in the short run. Okay, so you want to think through, well, it's imperfect competition. It's a monopoly, which means the firm is the market, but they're losing money. Okay, so that means we're going to have a high ATC. So I'm just going to do a quick sketch over here. It's always good. You can never do too many reps here when you're sketching these. So if you chopstick it, and you think, okay, Mr. DARP obviously is separated here. We have our marginal revenue and our our demand, which is our price. And because they said they're losing money, that means we're going to have a really high ATC. It's going to have to be way up there. And sometimes it's good to make a quick sketch to think about it before you have to make a nice one that someone's going to have to grade. And you think, well, my marginal cost curve is going to have to zip through there, and I'll have that, and then I'm going to follow my rules of MRMC, which is right here, and that would be my profit maximization. I would go up to here, and you just kind of want to think through it quickly, and you say, well, there would be my costs. Here's my price. And you could see, well, here's your total revenue right there. There's our total revenue box. But up here, this is the money we're losing. And here's how much, sorry, I should have said before. This is our total costs, but we're bringing in this much. So this would be our total revenue. So here is our total revenue bringing in. This is our total costs. So when costs are more than revenue, you're losing money, and that's our loss box. Okay? So you just want to chew that and think, okay, I have to make a good sketch of that, but it's making sense. And we'll go from there. So this is A over here, so we'll make a nice graph, nice and clean here. And let's go ahead and I think for this one, I'm actually going to use a straight edge here. And so you might want to have one of these available for the exam. So we'll make a really clean graph here. Make sure it's real sharp. Okay. And all right, we'll even make our demand and marginal revenue really straight. Okay. And so we'll label there's our demand and price. And here is our marginal revenue. And we want to think, well, we need to make a really high ATC, so that I'm going to sketch here. So there's my really high ATC, well above my price. And then pick that minimum. So always remember your marginal cost curve has to hit the minimum. So I'm going to Nike swoosh that through here now. And there is my marginal cost curve. Looks like I got everything here. And so MR equals MC, my tattoo spot, really important here. And I think I'll take advantage of the straight edge here. We'll make a nice dotted line here. Okay. And let's see. I'm going to have to go over, what the heck, we'll use the straight edge here too, make a nice dotted line here. Okay, so there is our total costs right there. And then if we go over to our price curve, we've got that. So you may want to, guys, remember there's going to be some stranger grading your test, and so a neat graph, it can only help you. You don't want it to be eating away at your time, but it can make it really, can give that kind of intangible advantage when someone's grading something neatly done. So let's see, according to the question, we got to make sure we put in our right little subscripts and everything. In fact, I want to fill this in here. Here is our quantity, and here's our price axis. And it says, draw a correctly labeled graph for single cinema and show each of the following. Okay, we're losing money here. This is good. The profit maximizing price and quantity of tickets labeled as P sub M and Q sub M. So this right here, this will be Q sub M. And then the price I'm going to be charging, you're going to be careful. Make sure you put these in the right spot. You don't want to make a careless error. So there's the price that'll be charged right there. Okay. And we got that. So then part 2 says, the area representing the negative economic profit, or in other words, the loss, and they say shade completely. Well, because I'm using markers here, I'm just going to cross-hatch that right here. So this is the spot of the economic loss, because, again, below here, the rest of the rectangle, that would be revenue coming in. Okay, so we do get this much money, but we're losing. All right, looks like we've got A and B, or just A taken care of. Now B says, explain why single cinema continues to operate in the short run despite earning negative economic profit in the short run. Now there's actually more than one acceptable answer on here, but I think the one that's the most obvious is, why would you continue to open and function? I think they're guiding you toward a specific topic, and I'm actually going to come back over here and review this. This is easier to see in perfect competition than the confusion of imperfect competition. But remember, there's another curve here. And if you recall, when you were learning your cost curves, we had your ATC, but we also had your AVC, which was your average variable cost. And when we had our marginal cost curve come through here, we had a really important point when we sketched these, and it was this value right here. And this thing, this right here, this spot right here, is called your shutdown point. And the rule is that you stay open as long as your price is above your shutdown point, and the reason is this, it's a very practical one. Variable costs include your labor. So as long as you're making enough to pay your labor costs, your employees aren't going to work for very long without getting paid. So as long as you can cover your variable cost, you're going to have some other costs, and you should probably have enough savings to weather some slow times. We're definitely in the extreme of that right now with the coronavirus. A lot of this is exceeding people's savings for a business to stay open. But for normal things, you're like, yeah, it's kind of a slow month, and there's slow months in the year in retail. And so you would just, you'd weather that month and you'd still stay open, but you're making enough to pay your employees. So what they're leading you to is, why would you stay open? Well, you're still covering you're still above your shutdown price. You're still above your variable costs. And so if you're, just to give you an example, if you have a business that's open year round, and let's say you do really well every month of the year, but for some reason, February, for example, is your crazy slow month. You never do well that month. Every year you've been open, you've actually lost money that month. But you know that you don't want to be sending a message that you're having trouble or your business is shaky or something. So it's not like you're going to close your doors in February and expect everybody to understand, like, oh yeah, that's right, this is your slow month. That just doesn't work. You go ahead and stay open. Thinking about a restaurant where they're not going to close for a whole month. Now, there might be certain days of the week they don't open because it's slow. And obviously many restaurants close around 9 or 10 because there's not a lot of business at night. There's only a handful of restaurants that stay open that late. So the shutdown point here is really important. So that's what they were leading you toward. Explain why single cinema continues to operate. Now, I don't want to wreck the picture by putting in an AVC, but what they're meaning is that you're covering your average variable cost curve. So you could imagine, if we go to this picture right here, this point, this shutdown point where the AVC is hitting the marginal cost curve, it is below the price we're able to charge. So why would you continue to stay open? Very simply, I would say the price of tickets is above the shutdown point. Or, if you wanted, you could say that the total revenue is higher than your variable cost. You could also say that. You could say your total revenue brought in is higher than your variable cost, the VC. You could say that if you want, but I would my recommendation be on this one, just tie in the shutdown point. You say you're operating above the shutdown point. Okay, your prices are above shutdown point. You're in good shape. Okay. Part C. Would Single Cinema's total revenue increase, decrease, or stay the same if it decides to sell one fewer ticket than Q sub M? So I want to draw a little graph over here. And I want to review this really quick, and then we'll answer that. We'll put C up here for our answer, but I want to draw this graph. If you remember this, it's really important that when you have your marginal revenue curve, and I'll actually chopstick it here too. Here's my demand curve. Marginal revenue was very, very powerful and tells you a lot of information. And if you remember, the marginal revenue curve, where it is 0, it divides your graph, and there's a nice graph of this, I want to say in chapter 4. It divides your graph in half in the elastic zone and the inelastic zone. Okay? And where marginal revenue is 0 tells you on the demand curve your unit elastic spot. So right there is where it would be unit elastic. But what it also tells you, it tells you where your total revenue is maximizing. Okay, so this would be your total revenue curve. So your total revenue is a max when your marginal revenue is 0, and it's also telling you elasticity. Now, if you remember, when it comes to elasticity, if you raise your price and you make more money, you're in the inelastic zone. If you raise your price and make more money. But if you raise your price and make less money, you're in the elastic zone. So currently, this monopoly, actually, if you look over here, monopolies are always operating in the elastic zone. That's why they don't continue to raise their prices. If they raise their prices, they make less money because they're in the elastic zone. So what this question is saying, it says, would Single Cinema's total revenue increase, decrease, or stay the same if it decides to sell one fewer ticket? Well, let's see what that means. If it's one fewer ticket, that means we're going to the left. Well, to the left over here, let's see what would happen. If you go to the left, that's a higher spot on the demand curve, but we're in the elastic zone. So if you decide to sell less and then it puts you higher on the curve, it means your prices are higher. So you sell one less, that means it's going to be at a higher price. Well, what that means is you raised your price in the elastic zone, which means people walk away and you make less money. So your total revenue is going to decrease. Another reason you could say it is, look at this curve right here. As you move to the left, look what's happening to total revenue. As you move to the left this way, your total revenue is decreasing. So there's multiple correct ways to address this question. Would your total revenue increase, decrease, or stay the same if you decide to sell fewer? Well, make sure you get the points for the correct answer, which would be your total revenue would decrease. Your total revenue will decrease. Now let's explain why. Single cinema, is that what we call this? We'll say Single Cinema is in the elastic zone. So, less quantity is a higher price, which is less revenue. That's one way you could say it. You might even just have to say Single Cinema is in the elastic zone, and the rest of this is implied, because again, an econ person is reading this. But what you could have also said, you could have just said, it will decrease, and your explanation could be this. You could just say, because marginal revenue is positive. Because when marginal revenue is positive, you're in the elastic zone. So this right here, you guys, the less quantity, a higher price, which So less quantity is a higher price, which is less revenue. That's kind of implied by even just saying you're in the elastic zone. Okay, or marginal revenue is positive. So that's the point there. So less ticket sales in the elastic zone means higher price, less revenue. That is part C. Okay, really important graph right here. This tends to come up a lot about elasticity and total revenue. All right. Let's see. We are in part D. And part D, this is kind of unusual. Part D, they kind of totally switch gears on you, and they say single cinema hires workers in a perfectly competitive labor market. Ooh, it's Mr. Carlson and Mr. Polson time, and it's perfectly competitive. So let's do a quick review there. I'll sketch that down here. So if you remember, it's perfectly competitive labor market, and so remember there's the labor market that spits out the results for the firm. So this is the labor market. And just like in perfect competition in the POG, in the RIF, it's going to, instead of Mr. Darp, it's Mr. Carlson. Okay, so in perfect competition, there's Mr. Carlson, and here is good old Mr. Polson. Okay, and so this is usually labor, so this would be your wage here. Okay, and this is the number of people you hire. All right, so just a quick review. You want to know how many people to hire? It's going to be where the marginal revenue of the product that you're making is equal to your marginal resource cost. So when all of these employees are bringing in more money than they're costing until this one right here. Okay, so this would be this is the movie theater, single cinema. Okay, so it says once again, it says single cinema hires workers in a perfectly competitive labor market with a downward sloping demand curve. Mr. Polson. Oh, and by the way, very important, you guys, remember all of our synonyms for the RIF, resource market, factor market, input market. I've always called this Mr. Carlson, but frequently in the AP they're going to call this MFC because it's going to be the marginal factor cost instead of the marginal resource cost. So don't freak out when you see that. Okay? And they like to keep you on your toes with the vocab. So we have this perfectly competitive labor market. It says, suppose the number of workers available in the market decreases. What's going to happen? Now, there was no requirement here to draw any of this. I'm just doing this to help us understand. So don't get confused there. And so it says what will happen. So suppose the number of workers available in the market decreases. All right, well, here's the supply of labor, and here's the demand for labor. And if it decreases, so the supply decreases, we'll just move this over here. And so maybe a bunch of workers, they move out of the area, something like that. Okay, we'll call that S prime, all right? Well, what you guys can see is that since the supply decreased, it just pulled up Mr. Carlson higher on the graph right here. So now there's where Mr. Carlson is. So I'm going to call this Mr. Carlson prime, okay? So as a result of the decrease in supply, pulled this up. Now some people are good enough they can intuitively figure this out. You want to make your sketches and be confident in what you're doing. So now let's read the question. It says, what will happen to the wage rate? Explain. Well, we can clearly see the wage rate's going to go up. Okay? And so we're going to say what will happen to the wage rate. This is for number one. It will increase. So you can say wages will increase. Why are they going to increase? And you can say a decrease in supply, of labor in the market raises equilibrium. Raises the equilibrium wage. That would be fine. You can even just say raises wages. Even if you just said a decrease in the supply of labor. That's your explanation. And so I'm being a little extra wordy there. So just a decrease in the supply of labor. It's like, oh, yep, raises the prices. We're good. All right. And then part two says, what will happen to the marginal revenue product? What will happen to Mr. Polson of the last worker hired? So remember, we were just talking about this spot right here. Well, now this spot is right here. So remember, the last person you get hired costs what they bring in. That would be the last person. So I don't think this question is asked particularly well. think it's a little bit unclear, but here's what would have been a better question, a better wording. It should have said, what will happen to the marginal revenue product of the last worker hired compared to before the decrease in labor? That's what they're actually wanting you to do. So what they're looking for here for an answer is, what happens to the marginal resource or the marginal revenue of the product of the last person hired? It increased compared to where it was before. And that's all they're looking for. So we're going to say the MRP, the Mr. Poulsen, of the last worker increased due to oops, put that in the wrong order here. Due to, I'll say it that way, due to the increase in Mr. Carlson, or you guys can say MFC, whichever one you prefer. Okay, so the increase in the marginal resource cost, or Mr. Carlson, or the marginal factor cost, that increase brought us higher on here, and so the MRP of the last worker increased. Okay, and that is it. Question number 1. So kind of interesting. So we had a monopoly graph, and it was losing money, and then some questions about that, and then we kind of had this little curveball in part D about jumping over to the resource market. Okay, time now for number 2. So question number 2 on the 2018 exam is another question that has to do with marginal social benefit, marginal social cost, and externalities, which for the 2020 exam, that's no longer going to be on there. So question number 2 is not relevant for the review, so we're going to just move on to number 3. So number 3 is an interesting little question. It actually is a table form of a PPF, and it has to do with studying. And so I'm just going to draw a PPF here. You totally don't need to do this for this question, but what it's saying is, in both situations, if we said these are both 5, you could spend 5 hours studying econ, or you could spend 5 hours studying history, and then every combination there in between. And so if we said 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. So this isn't quite the scale here, but here would be 1, here would be 2, there would be 3, and actually would be better. This example doesn't do this, but for the graph it would be easier. We did 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we do here 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that way. And if you spent 5 hours studying your econ test, you could get 100. If you spend 5 hours studying history, you could get an 80. And then every combination in between here, it's going to be 1 and 4, 3 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 4. And the outcome is what you're going to get on both tests if you study. And so how are you going to allocate your 5 hours? That's kind of the idea. So here would be your econ scores, here would be your history scores, or this actually is the number of hours allocated, and what combination is going to give you the best score. That's kind of what it's doing, but it's doing it in a table. But you could think of it as PPF if you want it. So let's go ahead and see what happens, or see what we have for options here. So it says Nirali is a student at the University of Ainsley. She has 5 hours to study for 2 exams today. The tables below show her expected scores given the amount of time she studies. So these tables I have over here, we'll look at them a little larger here. So this is for micro. So if she were to be able to commit a full 5 hours, she could ace the exam. Down to if she doesn't study at all, she gets a 0 apparently. She doesn't know anything. It takes an hour just to get a 60. And then you can see, as she studies more, her grade's going up. That's not surprising. Okay, and now contrast that with history. They were trying to be helpful the way they made this table, but it actually ended up confusing a lot of students. They put this in the opposite, showing that if the combination was 5 hours for econ, that would have left no hours for history. 4 hours on econ freed up an hour. So that's why they listed it this way. But we'll just go from the bottom down. So if she studied spent all 5 hours studying history, she could get an 80. 4 hours would be a 77. You could see it. History is either a much tougher course or she has a tougher time with this one, but 5 hours gets her an 80 in history, whereas 5 hours got her a 100% in econ. And so to just study an hour to get a 60% in econ takes studying hours to get a 40. So maybe this is a rougher curve. But that's what she's faced with, and so she's trying to figure out how should I study. Study a little bit for both. How do I allocate my 5 hours? That's the question. So that's why it's kind of related to a PPF. So let's see what the questions specifically ask, and then we'll see what we have to do to attack these. So part A says, Nirali spends 3 hours studying micro and 2 hours studying history. Calculate her gain from the second hour spent studying history. Well, what they're asking without saying it is just find the marginal value of each hour. And so I actually want to go ahead and write those on here. So we'll leave this here. And so I'm going to put the in the margin here. So the marginal cost, the marginal benefit, I should say, of studying for an hour right here was actually 40. Okay, and the next one was 20. And the next one, so I think I'm going to put those inside here so we don't have to worry about it moving. So the value of this hour, the marginal benefit, which I'm just going to put right here. So I'm going to put an MB right here. Here was the marginal benefit of the first hour was actually 40 points. The value of the second hour, we had an increase of 20. The value of the third hour raised the score by another 12. The next hour was only worth 5, and that last hour was worth 3. So you can kind of see the diminishing marginal benefit. And since we just did that here, I want to go ahead and do that here as well. So I'm going to put an MB right here, and we'll just put that list. And so what I'm going to start from the bottom. So the marginal benefit of that first hour was 60 points. You study that second hour, raise your score by 22. Raise it that next one, still raising, but it's only 8. The next one, it's only 6, and the next one, it's only 4. Okay, so you can see the marginal benefit is decreasing, which makes sense. You study so much for a test, your last hours there, it's diminishing marginal utility or marginal benefit. Okay, so the question says that she does this combo. She does 3 on econ and does 2 on history. And so it says, calculate her gain from the second hour. Well, she gained by that second hour an increase of 20 points on her score. She went from 40 to 60. So that's all they're looking for. It's that simple. So what was the gain? It was 20 points. Okay. Then part B says, calculate Nirali's opportunity cost of the second hour spent studying. Well, that was why I had the PPF there. You can have opportunity cost on there. But we're going to look at it on the chart here. It'll make a little more sense. So the opportunity cost, if you remember, trade-offs are all the things you gave up. The opportunity cost is the most valuable one. So I'm going to go over this a couple times so I don't lose you when I do this. So let's look at what happened here. She had this combination. She did 3 hours here and 2 hours here. Okay. Now, what she could have done, and this is the part that's you have to be careful about here, it was what was the opportunity cost of going from 4 and 1 to 3 and 2. Okay, so the opportunity cost is what did you give up to study that second hour? Okay, so here's what could have happened. If she would have said, I'm going to study 4 and 1, look what could have happened here. It would have been a 96 and a 40. So what she decided to do was go to 3 and 2. So her gain was 20 points, but what did she give up by doing this? That's the big question. Well, because she had to give up studying an hour for econ, that dropped to 3 hours. So what did she give up? She gave up going from a 96 to a 90. So the opportunity cost, the thing that was given up, was 6 points on the econ test. So that is the opportunity cost. It was 6 econ points. Okay? And again, if she would have studied 4, she decided to add an hour here, so she gave it up to only reduce this to 3 hours. So she went from a 96 to only a 90. Okay, so she gave up 6 econ points. Okay, and if you wanted to do it on the PPF style, if you wanted to think about it that way, you were moving from here to here. What did you give up to make that move? Well, she gave up 6 points, 6 econ points. All right, letter C. Assume Nirali increases the time she allocates to studying history. What happens to the opportunity cost of studying history? All right, so she's going to allocate more of her time to studying history. Well, let's see what happens. So again, this is a little bit subtle. So what happens, we saw that when she studied 4 hours, she gave up 6 points. Okay? Well, let's pretend, just for the sake of this example, let's pretend she said, I'm going to give 5 hours to econ and I'm going to get a 0 on this test, just for the sake of example. What did she give up by going an hour for history when she said, I'm going to do 4 and 1? Well, she gained 40, but the opportunity cost is, what did she give up? Well, she gave up the opportunity to get 100 and only get a 96. So the opportunity cost was the marginal benefit, which was 4. So she gave up 4. Then she gave up 6. Then she was giving up 8. As she continues to study more for history, the opportunity cost is increasing, because look what's happening to the econ score. It's really plummeting. 4, 6, 8, 22 points, and 60 points. So it says, what happens to the opportunity cost of studying history? It's increasing. So I'm just going to say the opportunity cost of studying history more is increasing. Now, when it says explain, the explanation is the econ scores are decreasing. This is going to sound like a calculus answer right here. The econ scores are decreasing at an increasing rate. And for those of you calc people, if you keep taking econ, you'll be doing calc-based econ and see the relationship of derivatives that are all over the place in economics. So the econ scores are decreasing at an increasing rate. Okay? Then part D says, assume that Nirali has a goal of maximizing the sum of her test scores. So this is kind of silly, and actually a lot of students got confused on this question. Now, if you guys were trying to figure out how to do this, I'm sure you guys would be looking at, well, what's my grade in each class? How's this going to affect my average? And there would be a lot going into your calculation of how much you would study. So this isn't very realistic, so you have to kind of play dumb with it. But it says, assume her goal is maximizing the sum of her test scores. That's the most important thing. Okay, so the score on micro plus the score on history. How many hours should she study? Well, she still only has these 5 hours, so let's just see what the sum of her scores would be. This is actually kind of a silly question, but we'll just write it. So let's go to the first one. So I'm going to put econ here, history here, and then I'm going to write the sum of her scores. Okay. So I'm going to do this combination. It would be 5 and 0, 4 and 1, 3 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 4, and it looks like we need one more here, and 0 and 5, and so we'll just see what the sum is, and then that'll tell us which is the best combination. Okay. So we'll just do this as we look at the chart up here. We'll be able to add these in our head. All right, so, and that actually, it's a benefit to having it written this way. So if she does 5 and 0 this way, she would get a 100 plus a 0. The sum would be 100. If she does 4 and 1, she would get a 96 and a 40. That would be a 136 total. If she does 3 and 2, she would get 90 plus 60. So that would be 150. If she does 2 and 3, she would get 82 plus 72, and that would be 154. And if she does 1 and 4, she would get 60 plus 77. So that would be 137. And then back to the 0 and 5, we'd have an 80. So if the goal is to maximize the sum, then it's right here at 2 and 3. So how many hours each? So there's your work right there. So it would be 2 hours micro and 3 hours history. All right, so that would be our combo. And that was D. All right, E. Nirali learns that her tennis practice has been canceled, freeing up an additional hour for studying. Given your answer to part D, will Nirali allocate the additional hour to studying micro or history to maximize the sum? Explain using marginal analysis. Okay, so if she's at this spot right now, we just have to see what's going to help her more. So let's see what would help her more, adding the hour to econ or adding the hour to history. So here's our marginal analysis. All right, so at 2, she had an 82. 2 hours of econ is what she's sitting at right now. So if she adds an hour to 3, she's going to pick up 8 points. Okay, so the marginal benefit of an extra hour of econ is an 8-point bump. Now let's see what would happen if she would increase history from 3 to 4. If she increases her studying from 3 to 4, she's going to pick up an extra 5 points. So 5 points for studying history, 8 points for studying econ. She's better off adding the hour to econ. And so we have to explain using marginal analysis. I'm going to say an extra hour of studying econ yields 8 points, while studying history yields only 5 points. Nirali should study an hour more of econ. 8 is greater than 5. Okay, and then her total would bump up to what, 162? All right, so explain using marginal analysis, we've got it there. Okay, so a little bit of a interesting kind of a PPF marginal analysis type graph. What should you do the most of? And that's what we have. So that was number 3 on 2018. And again, number 2 was a social cost, social benefit, not a topic you need to worry about for this exam. All right, so there you have it, 2018, number 1 and number 3. Thanks for watching. We will see you next time.